Yeah, I like that.
What'd you find?
Oh, it's fine.
I rescued them too. Yeah.
For the dogs, are we going to be given like, are we going to assign a group, or are we supposed to like find our own group for the dogs?
Yeah, you got to find your own group. If you don't know anyone or not successful, then we'll assign you to someone. But there's a thread on the discussion board for people seeking other people. So check it out on Canvas. Hey, how are you? Good. No need to be intimidated by poetry. Back in the early days of the pandemic, my lab and I got caught up in a terrible comedic poetry slam. And this is when we thought the pandemic would last a few weeks and we'd be back. So we were all still bright and cheery and squeaky. And we started pushing back hilarious poems back and forth, and they're just so bad. They're so bad. And so, you know, poetry can be bad and funny, and it can be good and deep, and sometimes those things cross over. But I threw this up here to give you a laugh, maybe relax a little bit, maybe just look down at us in disdain. But in any case, you know, you should be thinking about your poem. It's a few points at the end of the quarter. We'll want your poems, and I thought I would start at the lecture with something light and funny because it's a midterm today. So now, hopefully you've had a chance to see these. If not, they'll be on the lecture slide because I know you don't want to miss them. So let me now ramp up for the rest of the lecture. Take me just a second here. Sorry, it's on a loop. See if I can get it off the loop. It's one of those technology things that I thought would be perfectly seamless. Sorry. Shit, I can't get to the rest of it. This is embarrassing, figuring out watching my incompetence at the group level. Okay, there's one solution. Bingo. Yes, just delete them. They're in another copy. And there we're back in business. So now let me share the screen again. All right. I think it's working, by God. So this afternoon, if you need a break from things, you can go down to the Pewter Creek Lodge on the Arboretum where the AFS, American Fisheries Society campus group is fishing for carp. So if you want hilarity and snacks, you can go see people fishing for feral carp that tend to dominate the Arboretum, and they have snacks. So it could be like a nice break from whatever else you're doing. Feel free to join them down at the Pewter Creek Lodge, 2 p.m. So the plan for this week is the exam today before midnight. No exceptions. Please turn it in before midnight. I want to say again that, you know, everything is open book and everything is open discussion, but, you know, use the highest academic integrity, okay? Please don't just go and call up your buddy and say, hey, it's choose A, B, C, and D for the multiple choice questions, you know? So you can discuss the multiple choice questions, but then think about it and make your own decision, because Canvas will pick up patterns. And if you're all getting the same, or if a bunch of you are getting the same problems wrong and right, then it'll flag you. And you know what? I don't want to deal with that, and neither do you. So, you know, use integrity, use the, you know, it's the principles of community, which I think are really good here at this campus. I rarely ascribe to, you know, like the Pledge of Allegiance or these sorts of totemic things that we're supposed to sign up for to be socially compliant, but the principles of community hang together really nicely. And so I implore you to please respect them and respect yourselves and your peers by appreciating the fact that it's open book, that I trust you, and just return the trust by doing your best on it. And really, I don't think it's too hard a class, and I don't think it's too hard an exam. So if you put in some effort, it should go okay for you. That, you know, it'll take time and effort. But anyway, enough about that. I'm not going to have office hours today. And I'm sorry, but there's just no way for me to wedge it in. I'm interviewing Peter Moyle for another lecture that we have, because Peter can't come in person. So I'm booked solid. And the truth is, and maybe you know this, but y'all are kind of my side gig. I'm I'm a research scientist here, and the university like hates paying me to actually teach, so they don't. And so I have a whole, I've pretty much put myself into this class because I love it. And you are the most terrific group of students I've ever had. You're just a great group. But I need some time for myself. I'm backed up on grants and research and stuff. And I just have to, in addition to compiling lectures and getting the exam together, I need to pay some attention to it. And so, so I planned for Andrew Ripple to give one of the lectures well in advance, and I'm advancing the period in which he does that to Friday, because I need Friday to do some stuff for myself. And so the lecture is slightly out of order, but it's a fun lecture. It's pre-recorded. It'll be online, and honestly, it's recycled from 2020 when he gave this class online. But it's about centrarchids. So I've advanced it out of the centrarchids are part of the Acanthopterygian. They're spiny fish, spiny-rayed fish. And so it's a little bit out of order, but I think it's a good introduction. And nobody knows centrarchids like Andrew Ripple. That's what the source of much of his research and his dissertation back in the day. And so it's a fun lecture. So I'm going to give that to you. And thank you for understanding. Yes. It's all going to be on Zoom. There will be nothing going on here in the class, okay? The tide pools. So I'm going to be down at the tide pools. There, you know, the weather looks really fair. I don't know what the surge is like. You might be a little rough out there, but I think it's a great day. So I'm going to be down at the Pillar Point Harbor myself. I'll be parked on the west side of town, out on West Point Drive. I'm not quite sure what parking's like out there, but there is a parking lot. I'll be there Saturday at 3 p.m. And if you want to join me, you're welcome to. Shoot me an email, will you? And let me know so I can kind of have some idea about how many people are coming. You're all welcome, but I'm sure there's logistics for many of you. So just let me know. I know a few of you have already told me that you'll probably show up and meet me there. So yeah. Here, I don't know, use Google or Waze, Google Maps or Waze. You know, in the middle of the night with no traffic, it's an hour and a half. And so Saturday afternoon, I don't know, a couple hours. It's a long haul. I'm going to stop in San Francisco and see my mom. So it breaks up the trip for me and helps me evade some of the traffic patterns. But in general, on Saturday in the afternoon, probably getting through Dixon is going to be the worst of it. And then if you head out to 101 on the far side of San Francisco, take 37 and 101 down through San Francisco. I think that's going to be the fastest way. Avoid Berkeley, avoid the bridge. But, you know, Waze, Google Maps, probably show you the best. And the traffic just changes from weekend to weekend. Okay. Blogs. So I want to tidy up with some of the business here for a short lecture before I let you go. So it's a group project, and you knew that. But let me just get into the details of it. I'd like to have 3 people. So it's up to you to find a group of 3 people. If you don't know anyone in class because you've been focusing on the lecture, you've been at home a lot, or for whatever reason, you may not know 2 other people to work with. And that's okay. I think there are many people in your same situation because many people have come to me already. So this is a chance for you to reach out and meet some new people. You can do it here in lecture, you know, on the way out. You can do it on the discussion boards. I know somebody has started up a discussion about this. You can do it on Discord if you're using that. But, you know, find a couple other people. Otherwise, we're just going to throw you into bins. Rochelle is going to organize it and throw you into bins with random strangers. You probably couldn't go too wrong with this class, but it's always nice to hedge your bets and choose yourself proactively. When you figure out your groups, you'll need to email Rochelle by next Friday, November 5th, what your group is. And then she'll, oh yeah, thank you. Scratch that. By this Friday, you should have the groups organized and email Rochelle. By next Friday, you should have had a brief discussion with everybody and you should have some idea of a topic. It doesn't have to be a precise idea of a topic, but you should have some idea of a topic. And topics include something topical, something related to fish ecology and management. I'll take things as broad as aquatic restoration or aquatic management for, multi-species benefits. I'm cool with controversy, but it can't be a, just like a social media pop off like rant, right? No rants. It's got to be informed. So you got to do a little bit of research. And the way to do a blog is to find a piece of research, or it could be a couple of really informative articles from a well-reputed news source that you want to, like the New York Times or something like that. It could be, but then you'd have to have a few sources to support your work. But ideally, you find a piece of research that deals with a controversial topic, and you choose one figure from that, maybe one figure and one picture. And those are the centerpieces of your blog. And you use that to sort of frame all your writing. So it relates to the figure, and you pull it out and put a context for it. That's the way the most successful blogs are. And they're very short and very simple. It doesn't really have to be terribly long. It just has to be kind of thoughtful, where you dig into something, you're going to highlight one paper, but you'll probably cite as many as 3 papers, sort of supporting your general arguments. So keeping it simple, not writing a monograph on something, stripping down the arguments that it's bite-sized in the way that we tend to digest social media. And for more inspiration, go to the Cal Water blog and you'll see that's the format. And there are some people who are very wordy and go on and on with very large articles, but look at Jay Lund's pieces. Jay Lund is the director, and he cranks out blogs on a weekly basis. And so that's his style, basically. 1 or 2 pictures, one figure, one picture, and write something about it. The idea is to bring something to the public that otherwise wouldn't be accessible. Bring something to, that you understand about fishes, fisheries, restoration ecology, aquatic ecology, and act as an interpreter of science for the general populace. So that's the goal, is to get you to work on science communication stuff. And good submissions. If we get good submissions, we'll submit it to Jay Lund and Andrew Ripple, who are the editors, for publication. Okay? Okay, any questions? Yeah. About how long can it be? Well, it's pretty flexible. 1,500 words, something like that. At the most, I would say. I think in the I don't remember right now, but I think in the assignment description, which you can see on Canvas, I specify the range, but I think it's in the 500, 1,500 range. And if it's not, I'll clarify later. But that's the zone that you're shooting for. In this case, short is sweet. And then, here's the other thing that's really key about this, is that it's a group assignment. And so, my not very famous experience with group assignments was in my comparative communism class as an undergraduate. And in comparative communism, the teacher, it was a great class, but the instructor decided to make victims of us all. And so he assigned, everybody's laughing, comparative communism, what is he, a commie? Maybe, I don't know. So he assigned group projects, like 5 people, and we would take a country and deconstruct its approach to communism, whatever that was, whatever that meant to that country. And we got a group grade for it. So everybody got the same grade. And inevitably, 1 or 2 people do all the work and everybody else is like hangers on, right? You've all had that experience. And that was, for him, that was the metaphor of communism. It's like, there's and he's just rubbing our faces in it. And I went and I sat down to it with him later. I was like, you're killing me with this grade, man. I worked really hard. And he's like, well, you made a great effort, but you had a hell of a group. And so now I'm passing on that legacy, and that really sucks. So here's the deal. Everybody's got to contribute. And the way that we can guarantee that now is that we expect 2 submissions. One submission will be a draft version with track changes. You know how you can track changes in Word when you're editing? If anyone is, no, you're going to learn because your life depends, your grade depends upon it, not your life, just a grade, people. So you can go through editing, like I forget the actual tab, but you go through, I think, editor, and then you go to track changes. And essentially everybody who writes gets a, hey, you know what? I don't know what's going on in the corner over there, but it's really distracting to me. Hey, buddy, hi, are you a member of the class? Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry, you're just really distracting me. Yeah, could you just be quiet? I know you came in late and now you're distracted. I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. I really appreciate it. It's just like, I'm not sure what's going on. Thanks. So track changes. You go to track changes, and then as you write, you'll get a color. And the other 2 or 3 people will get a color too. And so it's a document of everybody's contribution. So you're going to submit a rough draft with showing all the track changes. And then you're going to show a final draft as a PDF with none of the changes showing. And that way, we know that you all contributed equally. And we expect everybody to put in, at least a third. And it might be that it's not like paragraph by paragraph. It's that, essentially some of you started to write a draft and then everybody contributed and changed some of the language. And so we expect a draft that reflects your contributions. And you can agree on what that draft looks like. Yeah. Like on a Google Doc? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it works the same way in Google Doc. Google Doc's a great way to collaborate too. Okay, so that's so the idea is to get you guys working collaboratively, to meet somebody else. It's hard to work collaboratively, but it's also fun to work collaboratively. And you get better ideas that way. All my papers are with other people now. And so it's very rare that we write an individual paper or an individual blog because the problems are complicated and kind of more voices bring more insights. So that's why I'm doing it this way. Also, I didn't want to read 135 blogs. That's the truth. But it's also a good learning opportunity. And it means that we might get a few of them published that way. Okay, any questions then? Onward. I think you should probably take a crack at reading Bork et al. 2020, Small Populations in Jeopardy, which is about the Delta smelt. It's a really interesting article about what the heck do you do with a weird, small, insignificant species like the Delta smelt. And I think it's pretty thoughtful. It was written for a law review, actually. So it has, it talks about the legal implications. And there was even a rebuttal to it, and we replied to the rebuttal. So it was great fun. Opened up a bunch of controversy. So hopefully it's more fun. The footnotes on it are really great. So if you get a chance to read the footnotes and leave the rest of it. Helfman et al. There's a section on teleosts, spiny rayed fishes, the Acanthopterygians, and it would be good to read that in preparation for Friday and the week beyond. And then also deep sea fishes. There's a short section on deep sea fishes, which is pretty cool in Helfman, which gives you some more background on what I'm talking about today. And then finally, Aristotle. I want to talk about Aristotle. Aristotle was a marine biologist. He was like one of the first scientists, certainly the most well-recorded scientist. And he identified a whole bunch of species, like probably 700 or so marine species from the Mediterranean. And he was just an example of the Greeks' penchant for observation and interacting with the natural world to understand basic principles. He came up with a lot of interesting ideas, and a lot of them were wrong, but it's not exactly like he had the shoulders of giants to stand on, because he was one of the first of the stepping stones of science. But that same kind of like observational care that Aristotle had sort of was inspired and inspired the whole period. And so when we look at classical art, classical meaning Greek and Roman art, which really formed a foundation for later European art, early on, from dating back from the 4th to the 1st century, we see like these great representations of fishes that, like other earlier societies, were very, very accurate. They're very representation of the species that they were caught out there. So these are called red character fish plates, and so the way that they were painted in is using the black and the white, and the red was the color of the clay. and they were used for serving. They were serving platters for seafood. And in the middle was this little bowl type depression, so all the juice would float down there, and people would suck up the juice, or mop up the juice. And you can see on the let me see if my pointer is going to work for me here. Oh no, that's the wrong one. So many technical difficulties today. Okay, there we go. So can you see that? Sort of? No. On the left, that's a so this fish right here is a mullet. Remember mullet? They were the source of that Egyptian delicacy that people loathed. So a very popular fish, prepared in many different ways in the Mediterranean. And this up here is probably a white grouper. I know that from the rounded caudal fin and the overall intense body shape. And then of course, this is an octopus here. Over on this side, this is probably what's called the porgy. And this is a Mediterranean sea bass. It's got the two dorsal fins that kind of give that away. This is a torpedinidae. This is an electric ray here. And of course, these are squids. It is really cool that you can go back and go, oh, these were people like to eat way back in the day. In the Roman period, especially well preserved in places like Pompeii and Herculaneum, which were the towns that were basically filled up with pyroclastic debris from the explosion of Mount. Thank you. Just total like Mount Vesuvius. As they've excavated it over the past couple of centuries, really starting in the 1800s, I believe, they found these amazing mosaics. And the mosaics were made by using small bits of pottery or stones to lay these in. And this is just a really great example. They would find, this is actually in a house. This is in somebody's obviously very wealthy person's house on the floor. And there are also some marine mosaics on the floor of bathhouses. And in general, the art all throughout Pompeii and Herculaneum is amazing and very funny and very rich in terms of demonstrating day-to-day life. But the mosaics and the frescoes are pretty phenomenal. This is a mullet up here in this corner. Here's another electric ray, which apparently they dug eating them if they could catch them. This is probably a bream. These are a couple of sharks here, soup fin sharks, so squaleid sharks. This is a conger eel, like a deep sea eel. And this is probably a Mediterranean sea bass here. So the penchant for classification. However, an interesting thing occurred as the classical period wore on. The images of fishes became less and less concrete and more abstract and symbolic. So in this picture here, which actually, this is a very old picture, probably representing, well, some people say that it represents Orpheus fishing for, not Persephone, Orpheus's long lost love. It's a bad day today. Thank you, Persephone. I'm glad some of you are on it. Man, I guess I worked too hard yesterday, writing a midterm. So he's fishing for Persephone. He's fishing for eternal life is the symbol. So in the myth, Orpheus went back to the underworld. He to find his bride, Persephone, who was stolen by Hades, and he tried to bring her back. The deal was he couldn't turn around and look at her until they reached the surface. At the last minute, he got overexcited, looked back, and boom, she was gone. It's a great myth, and a couple of great movies came out of it, and a play on Broadway too. That's really hip right now. So anyway, this is the thought, is that he's fishing for like eternal life, and that symbol carried over into the Roman period as well, where people are like fishing for eternal life or life after death, and yeah, life after death. So they eventually, these fishes, especially in the late Roman period, became more and more a symbol of eternal life. And they became less representative of a fish. Like, what is this? Goldfish? Could be anything. It's just a fish. And as that symbol of eternal life eventually came to be incorporated into the Christian mythology, and so, and that's what this very early on, this is back from the 1st or 2nd century, became a symbol, sort of a secret symbol for Christians. And interestingly enough, the phrase Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior, which in Greek is Jesus Christos Theohuitos Soter. You take the first letters of that and you get the Greek letters ichthes, the I, the X, omega, Y, and the sigma, I think it is. And so these Greek letters spell the first letters of the Jesus Christ thing. They spell out ichthes, and so the fish and the ichthes became unified. This particular piece of graffiti shows that people used to take these letters and then bend them over into a mystical circle. And so you see both these symbols, the fish and the circle, as representations of Christianity. And whoever did this graffiti was clearly prophetic, because how would he know that you would start to see bumper stickers with fish on it on cars in the 20th century all over America? Anyway, that was my bad joke. He wasn't really prophetic. It's just a weird coincidence, but it does look like a bumper sticker on a car. Okay, we'll move right on now. That's the art history for today. So deep sea fishes. This is a pelican or gulper eel. Deep sea fishes are several groups. There's really only a few taxonomic groups that were able to penetrate the deep ocean. And from that period, they radiated into many different species and then converged on a similar body plan. These are species that live well below the photic zone of the ocean, which only extends down to 200 or 3,000 meters in depth. And examples of this that we'll look at today include things like, you may have heard of some of these: lanternfish, flashlight fish, cookie cutter shark, bristlemouths, and anglerfish. And these are very strange and unusual creatures. So the main orders that we're going to look at today are the Stomiiformes and the Myctiformes. And secondarily, we'll look at the Alopiformes and the Lampriformes. We'll look at the cod, the Gadiformes, and the Lophiiformes as well. Let me walk you through this a little more carefully here. So first of all, the Cyclosquamata, the Alopiformes, is one of the groups that I included on the master list of fishes. I'm only going to glance on these today. They're not going to be a significant part of the class, although they could be. We just don't have time. These include the lizardfish, which some of you may have seen in lab. They're a very deep water species found off the California coast, deep on the continental shelf. And also the tripod fishes, which have developed spines that they walk along the bottom are on. Very little is known about these. They were discovered only recently at quite deep depths. So that's all I have to say about the Alopiformes. Whoa. Oh, that's a bummer. And that's the lecture. Thank you very much for watching. How could this? All right. Okay. Okay. Aristotle. No. Oh, jeez, what have I done? Okay. Yeah, exactly. It's the damn poetry. Okay. All right. Huh. It's all here on my end. I apologize. As usual, full of apologies. Weird. I have really done it. Huh. Maybe we'll just do this. Huh. All right. I can handle it. We'll just do this. Let me share the screen for the people at home. Every time I try to do something fancy with technology, something stupid happens. You can see that okay? Cool. Let's minimize this. All right. Great. Okay. The Alopiformes, also a group that we're just going to I'm just going to mention. It's on that grand scheme of critters that I showed at the very beginning, but you know, there's just so many things to talk about, and I don't want to dwell on these. Another really interesting group, the Opas and the oarfishes. Opas they live in a really cold water environment, but they have interesting ways of regulating their body temperature, so they're basically homeothermic. The oarfishes are really rarely seen, giant animals that hang vertically in the water column, waiting for stuff to kind of rain down at depth on them, and are only known really, well, here's a picture of a diver. They've only known recently live because of rare opportunities, especially with submersible vehicles, and then, you know, from dead specimens that have washed up on beaches. And so a group that we will talk a little bit more about are the Stomiiformes in the superorder Stenopterygii. These include marine bristlemouths, hatchet fishes, and viper fishes, which are a species that you will rarely, if ever, see, but are extremely abundant just because of the volume of the environment they live in, as well as the lanternfishes, the Myctophoformes, another species I'll spend a little bit of time talking about, and finally the Paracanthopterygians. In this case, is the anglerfish is represented by order Lophiiformes, and I kind of wedged them in here at the last minute because they're very interesting, and we'll see if we get to them today, given my technical problems. So, deep sea fishes, you know, essentially the world's oceans make up well over half of the Earth's surface. It's 70% or 2/3 of the Earth's surface, and so that's the bulk of the planet. And so they're distributed across this landscape in a way that other organisms aren't. And they, you know, because of the pressures that they live under, life in those depths is extremely different than life at the surface or life in the air because of the nature of water and the extreme atmospheric compression at that depth. And there's just a few representatives, a few lineages, about 4 or 5 superorders that have actually made it down there. And then they've dealt with resource scarcity in a variety of ways, allowing them to speciate, and then they've tended to converge. So we get a whole bunch of these fishes that look a lot alike each other, even though they have different origins, or even though they've radiated and then sort of converged on similar body planes because of the physical constraints of depth. And so, you know, I put canaries in a coal mine. I feel like I'm always saying that, well, because I'm a fish ecologist, so everything's a canary in a coal mine or a fish in a coal mine. But I think one of the issues, you know, with plastics in the ocean is that we're finding deep sea fishes that are essentially feeding on plastics that are drifting down to depth. And also we're wrestling with the change in temperature. These fishes are adapted to sort of a constant environment. A lot of them, especially at deep depths, don't change pressure and they don't change temperature very often. So changing climate, changing global circulation patterns may have a big impact on these species. And so just to kind of break down the zones of the ocean here for you. So the top 300 meters of the ocean is referred to as the epipelagic zone. And that's where, if you look over here, we've got, so these are, on the left is the depth. It got cut off a little bit there, but this is the depth in meters. And then these are the zones of those different regions. DVM is diel vertical migration, which is the daily vertical migration patterns that a number of planktivorous species undergo. This shows you the biomass as a sort of horizontal representation. You can see there's a lot of biomass at the surface of fishes, kind of intermediate down the mesopelagic, and then dwindling down at depth. And then this shows you light penetration in this category, and then depth, and then temperature at depth. And you can see after the epipelagic zone at the very top, there's like a real drop in temperature down to about 5 degrees for most of the rest of the ocean. So it tends to be a very cold water environment. So going back to the zones here, the upper 300 meters, which is where most of the light is called the epipelagic zone, and almost everything that we've studied so far in the marine environment belongs to that region. That's where the bulk of species are, especially along the continental margins and edges. But then below that, from 300 meters to about 1,000 meters, is the mesopelagic zone. which is still getting some light and has a number of species, especially planktivorous species that migrate vertically. So at nighttime, they'll migrate up to the surface of the ocean, and then in the daytime, they'll decrease. And it's a combination of following plankton. As plankton do these vertical migrations to avoid predation, so too do they follow the plankton and also try to avoid predation themselves. So going up at night when predation is less of a risk, and then going down in the day, because most of them tend to be very photosensitive. And then from there, we have the bathypelagic from about 1,000 meters down to the edge of the continental shelf at about 3,000 meters. And most of the species that we'll talk about today belong in that region. Below that is the abyssal pelagic and the hadal pelagic. So the abyssal plain, and there's very few species that survive about down at that depth. And there's just not very much that we know about them. So we'll just allude to them really briefly. And so I threw these graphs in because I want you to kind of understand like the magnitude of the oceans, which is like time, is very difficult to wrap your head around. So this is a sort of area accumulation curve here. And you can see that the amount of the air, so this is area on this axis, and this is depth on the y-axis. You see the amount of area of the oceans at shallow depths is very, very small. Everything else is way deep. So most of the area of the ocean, the open ocean, is very, very deep environment, which intuitively you might get. But when we really break it down, it's kind of shocking. And so here, this is Bend. This is the same kind of plot. It's a slightly different plot using similar data. Using a depth category, most of the world's ocean ranges between about 2,000 meters and about 6,000 meters. So it's this zone here, the bathypelagic zone, dominates the world's oceans. And if we relate that to fish biomass, it tends to decline with depth, as you would imagine. Most of the action is here on the surface, declining with depth. And thinking about that another way, species diversity also tends to decrease with depth. So for the Sarcopterygiae, remember the coelacanth, they tend to be a deep water species. In the case of the coelacanths, the lungfishes tend to be freshwater and shallow water. But you can see they go down to about 3,000 meters. We're talking, sharks go down a little bit more. Sharks have a real limitation because of their physiology. Osmoregulation is a problem for them. They use urea, essentially processed waste from their from metabolism to maintain isotonicity with the seawater around them. And at depths, that all goes kind of funny, and it doesn't function very well past 4,000 meters or so. So we don't get sharks and rays down at depth. It's mostly those really evolved Actinopterygian, the ray fin fishes, that have evolved sophisticated osmoregulation systems in bone structures that tend to be adaptable and can manage some of the extreme conditions down there. And so I'll let you take a look at this later, but this basically discusses what I just talked about, which are the sort of marker points by depth in the ocean. Probably a little hard for you to see up there. That helps a little bit maybe. So 3,000 meters to 3,700 meters, the deepest shark is found, or excuse me, down to 4,000 meters. Wait, where is it? Sorry. Okay, yeah, so the deepest species is found about 4,100 meters, and below that, there's a limit of essentially the urea issue. And the deepest fish has been observed down to about 8,000 meters plus. So, and then there's an ultimate depth issue. So that's sort of a physiological test of the pressure that fishes can tolerate. So, again, fishes are limited in terms of where they're going to be able to live. So let's talk a little bit about the mesopelagic zone. Here's the conditions that fishes have to tolerate. There's a rapid change, that thermocline that we saw with the change in temperature and the change in light. Basically, light starts to disappear at about 1,000 meters. Temperatures drop down to around 5 degrees Celsius, and the pressure increases, and this is phenomenal. If you've ever been diving, you know about this. Pressure increases rapidly at a rate of 1 atmosphere per 10 meters. So So yeah, so pressure increases really dramatically. Nutrient concentrations, oxygen concentrations all tend to decrease down there at depth. But nonetheless, there are so many fishes that have adapted to this. This is pretty interesting. So many fishes have managed to adapt that when hydroacoustics were being developed, particularly in World War II, they would essentially sonar to penetrate down to look for enemy ships was what it was originally developed for. And now we use it to like measure the bathymetry of the bottom. Well, the swim bladders of the fish, because they have swim bladders at this depth, they were so concentrated that they saw a false bottom essentially, because that's what the sonar bounces off the swim bladders and gives a signal. And so even though, and this is kind of this is sort of almost seems contradictory, but even though the biomass decreases of these fishes, they're still the most abundant fish in the ocean because the area is so large. So if you look at like so biomass decreases per cubic meter, but if you include the area of the ocean, there's just so much that overall total biomass is quite large. So here's some of the species I want to talk about. And I already mentioned that these come from 4 or 5 families. They have convergent body plans and diverse behaviors. So let's check some of that out. First of all, there's 2 kind of classes of the mesopelagic fishes. There's the planktivores that have this migratory diel vertical migration, and they tend to be a little bit smaller. They're more muscular than predators, which are larger and have less muscle, which seems to be a real switch from organisms at the surface. They all have very large eyes because they need it in the low light condition. They tend to have light emitting organs so they can find each other. The migratory ones have a swim bladder, but the predators don't. The migratory ones obviously are migratory, and the stationary ones tend to just hang out and wait down at the bottom. And I'll get into how that works in a little second here. So this is what I just said. The predators lie in wait for the planktivores to rain down on them. So here's an example of some of the mesopelagic planktivores. It's a hatchet fish up at the top, a lanternfish. This is a barrel eye, which is notable for these really weird eye structures they have. And then the bristlemouth. These are all common groups of these species. So let's talk a little bit about lanternfishes. Let me check my time. What time have I wasted today? Okay, I got a little bit of time. These are the Myctophiformes. There's about 246 species in the family Myctophidae. They're found all around the world at depth, and they're really cool to see because they bioluminesce. And you can see on the example here, if you can see my cursor, which I think you can, they have these little photophores all along the ventral side and typically along the bottom. Now it's interesting that you don't see a lot of photophores on the back. That's because they have something called counter-illumination. So if you're looking at one of these from the top, you would look down and not see anything because it would blend into the dark below. If a predator was looking from the bottom up, they would see light. And so that the light from the photophores would sort of blend them in to the light coming from the surface. And so anyway, yeah. I already talked about enormous amount of deep sea biomass. This is not the source of a fishery, but they're probably very, very important for other piscivorous animals, including whales and dolphins and tuna that can swim down to depth. Because they migrate, they become a really important source of nutrition for them. Otherwise, humans kind of ignore them. And here's one that's lit up, which is pretty fabulous. Okay, I want to talk about the hatchet fish as well. This is Stomaiformes. These are really different than freshwater hatchet fishes, which are like a surface dwelling fish, usually found from the tropics. This is a completely different group of animals. They're about 3 to 5 inches in total length in general, like all these species. They tend to be pretty small. And they have a pretty wide distribution as well. One of the interesting things to note about them is that they have these giant eyes. They point upward, and their mouth is pointed up as well. So you can see here, this is the structure of the mouth. they, the purpose of the large mouth is that these fish will essentially open that mouth and it's essentially, because it's a superior mouth, it's really easy for them to essentially open it and scoop up whatever is above them, whether it's falling down, drifting down from the surface or migrating down from the surface. A lot of these fishes, you'll see, are all mouth and very little of anything else. And these, like the other ones, have the counter illumination. Also, viperfish in the same family, or excuse me, the same order and family. These fishes are predators as opposed to planktivores. And so they tend to exist. They're kind of an eel-like shape. And again, they're all mouth. They stay at lower depths. And sometimes they'll rise to feed, and sometimes they'll just hang out on the bottom. Essentially, what they do is they hang out vertically, and they flash their photophores in an attempt to lure copepods or small invertebrates towards them. And they've got that big mouth, and they just grab them. They're very tiny. They look ferocious and monstrous, but they're super small. Oh, there we go again. There's another example of one. And here, this is a cool picture here because it shows the giant teeth. When you're at depth, food could be very, very limiting factor. And so having these long teeth, these very fragile, delicate teeth, essentially opens up a net. They have a hinge that their head folds back on, and it opens up a net so they can capture whatever comes their way and minimizes the chance of that prey item escaping. At depth, food is going to be a limiting factor. The other thing that's kind of limiting is oxygen. And check out the gill lamellae. Remember gill lamellae? That's a good term to know for this afternoon on the test. The gill lamellae are very finely spaced, and see how red it is? They're very, very, very full of capillaries, essentially. So there's a premium. This structure is designed to put a premium on low oxygen environments. So that's another important adaptation. Even though these critters tend not to be super active, they have to have really well-developed gills to be able to survive at depth. So that's my quick spiel on the mesopelagic critters. Let's look a little bit at the bathypelagic ones in the last few minutes that I have here. No light down here, even colder, higher pressure. Here's some of the cool critters that are here. They don't have swim bladders. And these, in contrast to the other ones, have like almost no skeletons and almost no muscles. They're really inactive critters. Here's a picture of some of them. They just tend to hang out there. In the case of bristlemouths, which is an incredibly abundant animal on Earth, although very scarce, very hard to find, there's trillions of them out there. They're very transparent. They feed on stuff that drifts down. These aren't good pictures, but they have a really bristly mouth that helps, again, catch critters that are coming down. Gulper eels are another example. They have like a really fragile, it's like a paper-thin skeleton. They have no pectoral fins, and they really don't have very many internal organs other than a stomach and gonads, and then this giant mouth. And what they do is they inflate the head and the mouth, and they'll gulp whatever comes out in their way. Here's a video of it if you want to watch later. It's really bizarre looking thing to watch. And the other group that I want to talk about, the anglerfishes, which are just deserve a little bit of our attention. The anglerfishes have evolved this little growth that comes out of the top of their head, and it typically has a photophore on the end of it, and they dangle it like a lure, and they fish for small fishes and invertebrates to come their way. And the females are these here, and all the left side here, these are all females. The females kind of sit and hang out with that big mouth and that lure fishing all day long. They have photophores, and they flash the photophores in an effort to attract males. And they also release a lot of like scent chemicals in an effort to attract males. The males are incredibly minute. So here's a female, here's a male. The males have to use scent and light to be able to find the females in this really sort of scarcely populated environment. Once they find her, the males latch on with their mouth and become a parasite. They feed off the female. They essentially merge into her body, and they lose all their other organs and become nothing but a sack of testes. And that's how they fertilize the egg and reproduce. And so I'll leave you on that last note. about the males in your life. Thank you for putting up with my technological challenges.
Dr. Duran?